Okay, hello everybody again, now for the YouTube video. So we are going to continue where we left off yesterday. So we started talking about Redux, and this is the application that we've built together. Yeah. So as we've said before, Redux is a framework that takes care of data in React, and actually Redux can be used in other frameworks as well. So for example, you can have Angular application that uses Redux for data. Can be interesting for somebody. For us, we are going to use it with React, so this is what we've been focusing on, and this is what we will continue with as well. So at the moment we have an application where we have one store. So that was one of the differences that we highlighted. That with Flux we had multiple stores, but with Redux we have only one store. I'll find the diagram for you again, just to remind you of the things we spoke about. Okay, good. So this is the one I showed you before. So we had Flux, which had multiple stores. Here you can have name store, you can have whatever last name store, and all of them are kept as separate instances. You have one dispatcher, and you have actions, and you have multiple components that are either listening or not listening to a store. In Redux, we said that we have one store, we have reducers, so we have multiple reducers, we have multiple actions, obviously, and we have the provider component that wraps the application and allows the component to be listening to the Redux one store. Yeah. So far what we did is we've created one store with Redux function create store. We send the reducer to it, where we said that reducer in Redux is a pure function that gets an old state and an action and changes the states and return a new one. Yeah? So that's what we did here. So we return the new one, which is very important. It has to be immutable, because otherwise you will just break the time travel of Redux, which is one of the capabilities we discussed yesterday as well. And that's what we have for now. Yeah. So we have one button that sends this text as a payload with an action and changes the data called name inside the application, and then this component, another one, re-renders it. Yeah. So that's fine, but I think right away it should propose a question like, do we really only have one store? You know, in a way that can. So I named this one like name reducer, and then this one name store. Yeah, so this proposes a question like, if I want to keep last name, for example, in this application, how do I do it? You know, if I create a new store, I'm breaking the thing I've said about this before. Yeah. So this is what we are going to do now. So actually, to begin with, I'll show you our current public repos about Redux. So this is the one we did yesterday. Yeah. So one store, simple example. So this you should already be familiar with. And then today we are going to do sort of, I'll call it like multiple stores, but it's really multiple reducers, because we said it's multiple reducers and one store always. Then we'll look into middleware, which is the fancy functionality how I showed you. Again, it was yesterday when we looked at the logger that can log each action, and it should be done very easily and very conveniently. So that's what Redux allows you to do, and that's what we achieve with middleware. And then we'll end up with a full example, hopefully, in 45 minutes to an hour, let's say. And then the one last thing that I want to show you is actually connect the Devtools inside Chrome, so the Chrome extensions for Redux Devtools, to our application, so that you can have that panel, you know, again I showed you yesterday in the previous video, where you can like do time travel and you see all the actions and you can skip them, you can commit to one actions, you can load, save states, stuff like that. So all the useful stuff that Redux brings. Okay, so that's the plan, and we have quite a lot of things to cover, so let's get to it. Yeah. So as I said, we want to introduce a new reducer. Okay. So in order to support that, I'm going to create a new component as well. So this one is change name, and I'm going to create change last name. Okay. So for now, let's just copy this, and let's do change last name. Here, change last name, which will be a component. It will have, for now, it will have state last name. Kotas is my last name, so why not? And we'll have the handle change last name. I'll just rename it everything, you know, to make it easier to follow the code later on. So we change the last name every time the input changes with dispatch and action, and there I'm just going to assume that there will be a last name actions and there will be a change last name, and I'm leaving this with like a question mark that we are going to implement this, but I've started with a component, so why not? Okay. Okay, and in the render, I want to change the button to make it clear. Change last name, here last name as well, and as long as I didn't forget anything, I think it should be it. Okay?
You have it wrong on 57 line. You have name last.
Ah, okay, thanks. Okay. Okay, rest should be hopefully fine. So now if I run this again, okay, this is odd. Let's update this and this looks like a JS fiddle problem, unless I'm going crazy. Which doesn't happen so often, so that's why I'm a bit surprised. Okay, this is interesting. For some reason, the example disappeared. I don't really understand why, but it's not a big deal because we can just start with the things that I've saved to my public. So I'll just open this and see if it works. Okay, it seems to be working. So let's fork this one. I make it not public and continue with this, and just I'll look into this later because this is very interesting for me. I have no idea what happened here. But anyways, this is pretty much the same component we ended up with yesterday. And as I did before, I'm just going to copy this one and hopefully not break it now. And okay, so now all the renaming starts again. So this is last name, this is last name, this is last name, last name. We have change last name. Okay, we do this here. Okay, change last name. Change. We said that this should be last name actions, right? And change last name. Okay. Did I forget anything? Do you see something that's missing? Should be okay, right? Good. And I'll add a component here. So let's run it. Fine. And I'll change the data as well. Okay, so now we have the component, and what we need to finish off is the Redux side of things, because obviously now if I click this, I'll get an error because the last name actions is not defined. Yeah? So nothing easier than to define the actions. So first we can just take these constants. I can add it here. Remember, this is JS Fiddle, so it's kind of messy, but when we do this properly in code, we will separate. Each constant goes to different file, all of the actions are in different files, so it will be much easier to navigate. So we have last name constants, okay. Then we have, so let's start with the actions. So we'll have actions here, which will be last name actions, change last name. This is something that is both good and bad about React, that you end up rewriting quite a lot, but it's not a big deal if you can create macros for this, for example, or you can just copy one store or one reducer file and then just rename a couple of things, but at least it's a very manual step, so you don't have to think too much about this. When you are creating it, you have to think a lot when you are designing the stores and everything, but when it comes to just writing the code, it's fairly simple. It's really straightforward. So that's one of the things. I think it's a good thing, really.
You did it again on 36 line.
36. Name last. Okay. Good. Glad you're paying attention. Okay, and change last name here, last name, fine. So we have the constants, we have the actions. Now for the reducer.
I think the constants is wrong, actually, isn't it? Name last, constants.
Ah. See, I didn't name it wrong. I just renamed it. No, obviously it's wrong. It should be like this. Okay, thanks Dan as well. So I've copied the reducer. Let's take this one and change it. So it will be last name. At least I spotted it now. Last name reducer, which will take. Okay, so here I have initial state, but I'll rather rename this to name initial state. Okay, and here let's take this and let's do last name initial state, and we'll have last name there, and this will be actually initial state. Good. Fine, so rename this console log action. We can leave it there for now, why not? At least we'll see if it works. And actually there's something I want to show you later on, so it's good that we leave it there. Then we switch on the action type, we go last name. So we are only interested in last name constants, okay? Should be last name, and we change the last name on the state of the store to this, and if it's default then we return the state, so that's fine. So now we did the reducer, and now we can create the store, okay? So, okay. Now we would create the store, but that wouldn't be Redux, because we would end up with multiple stores, yeah? So that's what we want to avoid, and the way to do it is, so remember how when we started, I actually do it all the time. I'm not sure if it's only me, but I every time I bring in a library of some sort, I like to see what's in it, Of course, it might be a better idea to check the documentation, but sometimes it's nice to just have a way to just really make sure, especially in like JS Fiddle, you just console log it out and you see what you have there, right? So we have a couple of things that we didn't use so far. So we have create store that we used, and then we have compose, we have bind action creators, applied middleware. That doesn't seem like something that we want now, but we have combine reducers that I think should sound like something we want. Yeah, so we have multiple reducers, but we want only one store, and the way to get around that is obviously to combine all the reducers to one, and the way it's done is quite simple. So let's call it combined reducer, right? And let's just call that method, this one that I've showed you. And I can even see it has one parameter, but that's where it ends. So now you either have to check the docs, or you have to ask me what the parameter is actually. So the parameter is an object, yeah, so that's what we know for now. So it will be an object, and the object defines which parts of the complete application state are handled by which reducer. Okay, so if we come back to the example with the Devtools enabled, and I go to these Devtools here, I showed you the chart before, and I told you that this is the application state, right? And this is something like a sub-state, if you will. And this is what is handled by the reducers, okay? So each reducer becomes responsible for handling one part of the application, right? So that's how we do it. So that's how we combine reducers. So now how to do it in real code, yeah? So let's call this name state, for example, should be a good name, and let's say that this will be handled by the what we called it, name reducer. Okay, so this is like a dictionary where you say this thing will be handled by this reducer, right? And then we do last name state and call it last name reducer. So this function gets such a JavaScript object that acts like a map, saying which reducer is handling which part of the state, and it outputs a combined reducer. Right? So instead of the name reducer, we use the combined reducer to create a store, and then I'll call it something like App Store. Apple might be angry, but because it really, we call the whole application app, so this is in fact App Store. Okay, and instead of using the name store that we had previously, we will just use this new App Store for the provider component. So this where we inject the property store to be some sort of store that we create, we just make it an App Store, right? So now if I run this, I'll remove the console log for Redux. We don't need it for a bit. So now run it again, and you'll see we get a couple of things, right? So first of all, there is the init, and it happens a few times. So the reason for that will be okay. Every action. So now we said we have multiple reducers, right? And there might be a question left for you, saying like, how do we know which action goes to which reducer? Yeah? Because obviously in this case, we only care about the change name in the name reducer, and we only care about the change last name in the last name reducer. Yeah? So this makes sense for our simple example, but the truth actually is that each action is sent to all of the reducers. So I can do something like case, and if the last name is changing, right? So remember, I'm in the name reducer, and even if the last name is changing, I can do something. And this sounds like we are breaking the architecture, like making it not so modular or not so separated at first. But then if you start working with it and you see some real example, you actually realize that this is one of the great things about Redux. Because, so imagine, I'll use the Facebook example once more. So it's the same as it has been a couple times already. So you have Facebook website, you get a message from a friend, you have the Messenger windows pops up, the notification says that you have now one message, right? And there might be some other things that happens on the page. So now if you either click to see the notifications, or if you click the chat and read the message, or maybe if you do some other things, this should always trigger I've seen the message action, okay? But since all these components can talk to different reducers, basically, get the data from different parts of the state, the good thing is that the reducer reacts to all of the actions, so even so all of the 2 or 3 or 10 or 100 reducers can see that you clicked or read or seen the notification or the message, okay? And it can react accordingly, right? So this is how it becomes very easy to like react to one action with multiple like changes of state, basically. Okay. So the reason why this fires a couple of times, why this action console log fires a couple of times, is because each reducer fires with each action. Okay. So that's one thing. And now if I change this, okay, so we broke it for now, but I'll explain why. So all of this is set up correctly, but our application stopped working. So why is that? Yeah. So now we can finally look at this first function that we sent to the connect function. Okay. So before we said that we are going to take the application state, the whole application state, and we will pass it through the props to the connected component, right? So when I did, when in the hello component, I did something like, bless you, Veronica, I did something like console log this dot props. All I got was the name, right? So we had only name there, okay? So let's do it now, yeah? Rather than tell you, I'll show you. So if I do it now, I will see name state and last name state, okay? And I will see that in last name state there is a last name, which is the thing that we're looking for, and in the name state there is the name that we are looking for. So this is there, so the state become more structured, basically, and the structure resembles the structure we created in the combined reducers, right? So we have the name state and we have the last name state that is here, and the actual data comes from the reducer itself. So we are changing the last name field inside that object, and we are changing the name inside the name state, right? So this was blank because we didn't handle the props properly, right? So instead of in the hello component, which is here, so instead of doing this.props.name, now I have to do name state, right? And since we've added some more data, we would like to see the last name as well, right? And this is how we structured our data. Okay? And this is something that you should think about quite a lot when you are designing your applications, because it's not written anywhere how many reducers should there be, and the reducers can actually be stacked on more than one level. So you can, or I'm pretty sure you can, I'm not 100% sure, but I think you can do something like this, and then you can have like something handled by one reducer and something else handled by another reducer, okay? And I think it should still work. And it should actually make things easier when it comes to like memory management and stuff like that, because since for time travel we keep all of the states, all of the copies of the states in time, if you allow it to only change certain parts of it, then JavaScript can be really smart about it and can like optimize the memory usage. So maybe if you partition the data better, maybe you can save a couple kilobytes here and there. But the major thing is you are giving it a structure, and that structure is then kept inside the application state as well. Okay, so you just need to be aware of that. We connected the hello component. Okay, we connected the change name component, and we should connect the change last name component as well. But before we do that, there is one last thing. So the first and this connect function actually has more than one parameter, but I think for now I'll just be quiet about it and either leave it for you to look at the docs and then ask questions, or just leave it for now and we'll get to it eventually, because it can be a bit misleading. But what is very important is this first one, and what I just want to point out is, so this maps the application state to the component props, okay? But you can choose, so if you are really sure that, for example, hello connected or hello component, would only care about the name state, you can actually ignore the last name state and you can only pass in the name state, okay? So then the props will like this, yeah? And it will be accessible via the name directly, and there will be no last name and last name state. So if I do it now, okay, last name of, yeah, this is null, so obviously this causes a problem. But if I remove this for a sec, you'll see that this works again, yeah, because I just mapped the whole application state to this component in a different way. Okay, so that's why we do this. But for now and for this we need the whole state as it is right now, yeah. Or you can even you can rename stuff, you know, which can be useful. So you can say like here, I don't want to call it last name state, but I want to call it like blah blah, and then I go name state, you know, and then inside this component blah blah will have the name property, right? So that's just something to practice a bit and to sort of get your piece with it, right? But for now let's keep just the whole state. It's just enough for you just to know that there is something like that. So as I've said, we need to connect last name component as well, so let's do that. Borrowing the code from this one, and it will be change last name connected, React Redux connect. We need the whole state again, let's say, okay, don't read too much into it, and we are passing the change last name component, and then instead of change last name we will render the change last name connected, yeah? So this connect method, as I've said yesterday, just returns a new component, yeah, so we call it different way. I could have called it the same way, you know, the same name, you know. I just wanted, since I don't know, I think it's better. I think it's better to call it connected now. When we do it in proper code, we will call it the same name actually, just to make it more usable. But for JS Fiddle, I think this is fine. This is correct approach. Good. So now if I run it, we have the whole state here. If I click this, changes this name, and if I change this, it actually changes the last name, because when I designed this component I've already used the correct, like the last action names, and I called dispatch on the dispatcher here. Yeah, so this is what we achieved, and I think it wasn't too difficult, you know. It's just some new code that you need to practice, as always, with all of the things that we did last couple of days. And it works. That's the most important part, and it works quite neatly, especially as the application scales up, right? So now, just to keep track of what we are doing, so now we did multiple stores, okay? I'll rename these to multiple reducers, because these people will complain, okay? Good. So we have 2 more to go, and the first one is middleware. So when I spoke about the benefits of Redux, I told you that it's very easy to add some sort of logging into it, and while here we did it with some console log actually here in the reducer, especially, so this one and in the other reducer as well, especially if your application grows and you want to be able to affect these reducers in a maintainable way, it's better to do stuff like this, like for example logger or error handler or some sort of like call some sort of REST API every time the user does something, like for some sort of analytics solution maybe. It's better to have a way where you can define these things in one place and just have it in one place, and that's it, okay? So let's run this again. Okay, we don't have any logs now, and let's add the logging with middleware. Okay? So for everybody to know, middleware is just something that is a step in trying to achieve something, really. So if you like want to talk to the boss, you will first have to talk to his secretary, you know, and that's like a middleware, you know, which is something that can either allow you to proceed, or it can give you something to do first, or it can disallow the progress and you will never talk to the boss. Yeah, so this is what middleware does in the web development jargon, and it's something similar to what we are going to use it for as well. So first of all, if I console log Redux again, there is a thing here called apply middleware. Yeah? So that's what we are going to use. So that's one thing. So there will be, let's do it here before we define the store. So there will be something that will create a middleware for us, and it will be called apply middleware, okay? And for now we don't know what this expects, right? So let me tell you. So first of all, a middleware is something like a function, let's say, that is defined like this. So let's create a logger, shall we? So let's create something that will log each action. So every time an action is fired, the middleware is called first, and it can do stuff with the action, and then at the end it's passed to the reducers, okay? So for something to be a middleware, it needs to, so I've said this will be a logger, so it needs to be defined like some sort of arrow function, which takes, so first it takes store, then it takes next, which is simply something. So next is something that you have to use, have to call. This is a function that you have to call at the end of you handling the data in order for the flow to continue, okay? And the last thing it gets is an action, okay? So if you define something like this, this is a middleware, okay? And then you can do stuff like console log action, okay? And if I do just this and leave it and use it as a middleware, so now I can tell you that the parameters for apply middleware is just the list of middlewares. There can be many of them. Obviously in a real example every one of them will be different. Yeah? So far we have just one. So if you apply this middleware, it gives you like a let's call it like a combined middleware, you know, to follow the combined reducer sort of naming convention. And in order to make this work, for the middleware to work properly, all you do is you just pass it as the second parameter to the create store, right? And that's it. So if I now start, if I send an action, I will get the logs, and this is the middleware. And I change the last name and I get the logs. But you see that the application stopped working again. And that's what I told you, that for the middleware to work properly, at the end of each action, if you want to proceed, obviously, you need to call the next and you need to pass in the action. So now, if I do this, I'll go click, I get the logger, and I get the action changing. Yeah? Is it always necessary to pass the action along? No, it isn't. Sometimes it's actually very useful, because imagine you have like some sort of authentication middleware where you call some sort of service that says if the user is authenticated to do the thing that he's going to do, and the result will be like, is user authenticated, okay? And we'll get this from, you know, some clever authentication service, okay? For now, let's fake it to be true, okay? And then you can condition the continuation of the flow by this being true, right? So now if I add the authentication middleware to this, I'll go here, I click the change name, and the name changed, and I get the logger. I click the change last name, and it worked, I get the logger. But if I change it to false, I will get the logger, because logger is first in the line, but I won't change the data because the user obviously is not authenticated. If I change the order of these, if I change the order, I'm pretty sure I won't get the logger, because I think yeah, I won't get the logger. The reason is, this is where we terminate, you know? So the middleware in this case is something like a chain of events, yeah? So you have the source, right? And you have the destination, which will be the this will be your reducer, and then along the way, by default, there is nothing in between those two. But now we've added the authentication, and actually in the last example, only after authentication we've added the logger, right? So if the authentication doesn't call, if it breaks the chain, the logger is not called anymore, and therefore the reducer is not called as well, right? So this is how we work with middlewares. It's very useful, and what is even more useful is there's a lot of them pre-built for you. Okay, so we've made this not very clever logger, let's say, but there is, for example, a library called Redux Logger. So I can bring this in, yeah, Redux Logger, latest version as of today, and this gives us a thing called Redux Logger. So instead of our, we use this one. You have to call it as a function because that's how this library has been written. It just returns the actual instance of the logger. And now if I do this, clean everything, I get these fancy sort of messages about every action. So you have like a previous state, what the action was, and the next state. So very useful for debugging, very useful for like seeing what the application is doing. You will probably not use this in production though, yeah, so that just I don't think it will be very necessary for end users of the application to see this or to be able to be exposed to this data. It might even actually be dangerous for, I don't know, if your data is not designed properly, you know, if you like expose some sort of password here or something, which you should never do, but you know how it is. So I'm just saying, you know, this is for developers, yeah. And there are so many useful middlewares that it's middlewares list that it's almost hard to keep track of all of them. But just to mention couple, so time travel, if you think about it, is something very similar to like undo and redo. You know, if you are in some application like Visual Studio or something, and you click undo, it will go to the previous state. You know, just click undo and it will go there. So it turns out that one of the things that Redux is very good with is actually adding this, and it's very simple. So basically you can have a button on your website which will allow you to do like undo and redo. Very cool, you know. And there's all sorts of things really. There's every time you send an action of some sort, you can simplify it by using some sort of middleware. Yeah, so you can find the list of the middlewares is actually, I skipped it somewhere. It's here, but you can easily find like list of Redux middlewares, and you'll see there's a lot of there's plenty, and some of them are very interesting. So we have an application. We used one middleware. Last thing that I want to show you is how to, because now if I go to this extension for Redux, it will think about it for a while and it will say no store found, even though we have a store there. The reason for that is simply you need to configure it, you know, as everything. So if we want to configure the this to work, we need to add some more code, but let me just first find something. Just a second. So I need to find it as well, I don't remember it. You just do this once and then it's done, basically. So, okay, here. So, Devtools Extension, first of all, is something that lives inside window console log window.devtool extension. So if you have this installed, it will literally add a JavaScript object to your window in order for you to access it, right? So if I do this, there is some sort of crazy function here, and this is actually this extension allowing me to talk to it. Okay, so knowing that, I can okay, wait a sec. Okay, now I remembered how to do it. So checking out the Redux library again, there is a thing called compose, and that's what we are going to do now. Yeah. So what we need to do in order to get this thing to work is to use compose, and compose is something that allows you to combine stuff like this. It's maybe more or less something similar to middleware, but not exactly, because it's more like an extension to the store, not a step along the way to the reducer, you know. So you can have a feeling that it's doing something similar, which might not be entirely incorrect, but the compose is actually adding functionality to the store, while the middleware is just something that happens along the way from the action creator to to the reducer. Okay, so if we use compose, it will give us I'll copy it because it doesn't make sense to write this stuff, and I'll explain. I'll try to explain. So yeah, so it's this. So right here, in order to create the store, we just did redux.createStore, we passed in the reducer, and we passed in the combined middleware. If you want to use Devtools, you do something like this. You use compose to create a function that you can use to create the store at the end. Okay, so you pass in the middleware, pass in all the extensions that you want for this store. Okay, and then this gives you a function, and that function you call with the create store. So you basically wrap the create store function with some new functionality. I store it in a variable, and then I can call it with combined reducers, giving me the app store. Okay, so that's how it's done. Yeah, so this way you can add extensions to your store, or to the this way you can actually add extensions to any method that you choose. You know, I'll need to read more about this, to be honest. This is something that you usually use only a couple of times when you are setting up the application. But as you can see, it can allow you to do pretty awesome stuff, so maybe it's worth to look into this a bit more. But now if I run this, middleware is not defined because we called it combined middleware. Devtools extension will definitely not be defined as well, because we need to do it like this. And now let's try to run it. Combined reducers is not defined. Combined reducer, right? Just a naming convention. It's one reducer, so we call it like that. And now if I change the name, it should still work, and we get this logging because of the logger middleware that we've added. And if I go here, this actually works now as well. So it wasn't so complicated, and the good thing is you can actually, it's not so hard to write your own Chrome extension, and as you can see, it's not so hard to connect it to a Redux application. So if you have a neat idea about doing something with this, it's not so hard to actually make it very user-friendly, you know, with Redux. So you can just add your new fancy extension that's going to do who knows what, and you can just extend the store with it, and you can use it. Yeah. And just to prove that this is actually working, so you see all of the actions here, and I can even skip some of them, and that way the application state acts as if this change last name and change name method never happened. And as I've said yesterday, you can download the whole state of the application, send it to somebody. Like imagine, you know, you have, so one of you are developing something and you struggle with it. You send me your application state, I pull down your branch, start the website, and get your state, and I can help you out, you know. Same applies with testers. Plus, you have the time traveling as well, which is quite good thing, as I mentioned yesterday, because this can like automate the website even, you know. It's quite useful, maybe even for like unit testing, or some, maybe not unit testing, but something like end-to-end testing. Yeah. So we finished this. By the way, if you do something like this, you need to be careful, because not everybody has this extension installed. So I've simplified this. If you take a look at the full example, there is some extra stuff here. So you need to make sure the window is defined, because you can be pre-rendering on server or something. Then you need to make sure that the Devtools extension is in fact defined, and only then you actually call it, right? Because if you use this, if you don't have this tool installed, just run this application, it will complain, you will get a console method, because there is no function like Devtools, unless you install it, obviously, and I don't think you have it installed already. But that's simple stuff, just make sure that this thing you are calling is actually defined and the window is defined. So that's what you should do. And that's it. So this is almost as much complexity as you can expect from Redux. So it's quite straightforward, makes certain things very easy, and it's very neat when you want to debug or you want to work with testers or stuff like that. So that's it for today, and we can move to questions. And I'll stop the recording now to make you a bit more brave to ask questions.